over the course of an NFL season, there's going to be the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. You go on a win streak, a losing streak. You could have major injuries. The most important thing is to be emotionally stable and stay to your systems throughout the entire process. This past year, we started 0-3, but things didn't change with how we operated. We stayed the course. We started 0-3, and then we end on a 10-game win streak.
Marc Lewis, welcome to VALDCAST.
It's great to be here, Ryan. I appreciate you having me on.
We've got 30-ish minutes. So I want to learn a bit about you, first of all, and then we'll dive into some key topics. But for anyone who's listening and they don't know who you are, give us a bit of a rundown, a 30 to 45 second snippet of who you are.
Sure, absolutely. So Marc Lewis, currently I'm the Director of Applied Sports Science for the Houston Texans. I'm also co-founder of a company called the Sports Science Network, which I founded with my good friend and colleague, Adam Virgil of the Clippers. So a little about me, military background right out of high school. So airborne infantry, and then started college. I kind of discovered my love of human performance while I was in the military. And from there, I went to college, knew I always wanted to study the human body and its response to exercise and training. So in undergrad, where I went to Wake Forest University, did my undergrad in health and exercise science. There, I always had one foot in the lab, one foot in the weight room. So it was all about all the research side of statistics, how to use different types of tools within, clinical laboratories. And then on the flip side, coaching athletes. Outside of that, I did personal training, basically working with anyone and everyone I could coach and work with. On to the University of South Carolina for my master's in applied exercise physiology. After that was when I got my first experience in like a true high performance environment at US Ski and Snowboard Center for Excellence in their high performance fellowship. Also was there with Bill Sands, the Oracle. And that's where just being able to soak up anything and everything I could from him in terms of athlete monitoring, sports science, a real pioneer in our field. And so that's when I kind of conceptualized this idea of like working as a sports scientist / sport physiologist in some capacity. But obviously those positions in team sport weren't readily available, or you didn't even see those really in the US at the time.
People didn't know what a sports scientist was.
No. So from there on to Virginia Tech, do my PhD in exercise physiology and metabolism. While I was at Virginia Tech, I was, working on the academic side in an integrated physiology lab, while also, in athletics, strength conditioning coach. We did not have a sports scientist, so I just kind of started doing that work, and that formed its way into a position, and I just worked my way up, and ended up when I left there, I was the assistant director of strength conditioning for football and the director of sports science for Virginia Tech athletics. And while I was there as well, I kind of shaped a plan of study around all the different skills that I thought were important for a sports scientist. So I took lots of courses of around 5 different colleges at Virginia Tech, and en route to all these different courses, epidemiology and different types of statistics courses and biomechanics and biomedical engineering and all these different things. I ended up picking up a couple of other master's degrees on the way. I was at Penn State as associate director of applied health and performance science before joining the Texans in my current role. Okay.
The interesting thing for me is I talked to a lot of people, and we've all got similar backstories. Most people are failed athletes, and then they transition into being a coach or being a sports scientist. For you being in the military, is there anything that you think has helped you moving into your current role? Have you taken anything from the approaches and the training that you've learned there, or what's the thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, I have an appreciation around building systems, creating systems around whatever problem you're trying to solve. In the military, it's all system oriented. And so I think a lot of what I credit being a systems thinker now is to my time in the military. As I worked my way up there, taking on different types of positions, I would always be anchored in what system we were in. And that always had me oriented to being a systems thinker. I think outside of that, my love of human performance around all the different physical qualities you have, right? It's like, I'm not just in love with the weight room in terms of even my personal life now, like running, cycling, swimming, trail running, like anything that involves moving the body and all these different physical qualities we train. I think having a wider lens around all the different physical qualities and experiences in these has really helped me in terms of my view of human performance. And ultimately, too, like in different times in my career where I've had to work with so many diverse sports that have different physical demands, different types of athletes, I feel like I've always been able to adapt really well and implement systems that were appropriate based on the needs of that environment. And I credit that a lot, again, to just my experience in the military and how my view of human performance was shaped.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, that's an interesting take, because I think a lot of people, I would like to think I'm pretty young. I might not look pretty young, but a lot of people go maybe 20, 30 years into their career, and then they see like a full circle moment, and they end up where the point you just described there about adapting to different problems. So it's really cool to see that you've jumped into that straight away. And that brings me to the next point, I guess. Like, the NFL is in itself, it's one of the most diverse sports in the world, from the different positional demands, the different athletes you get to work with. As a starting general question, how do you approach just dealing with the chaotic demands of an NFL season with your athletes?
Yeah, great question. I would say first thing is staying grounded in the systems and processes that you put in place. You put in systems and you have processes within those systems that you put in place for a reason. It's very deliberate. It's very purposeful. Whatever environment you're at in the NFL, whatever organization you're with, you get together with your performance team, you put together and develop these systems. And over the course of an NFL season, there's going to be the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. You go on a win streak, a losing streak. You could have major injuries. The most important thing is to be emotionally stable and stay to your systems throughout the entire process. And so that's it, regardless of what happens, the ups and downs of the season. This past year, we started 0-3. Going into the year, there were people talking about us potentially being a Super Bowl team. We started 0-3. But throughout that start, obviously not the way we wanted to start, but things didn't change with how we operated. We stayed the course. Everything that we put in place, we put it in place for a reason. So we stayed the course. No one panicked. We all operated, controlled what we could control every day, showing up, keeping the athlete-centered approach and executing our systems just as we would if we had started 3-0. And so I think that's one of the most important things of managing the chaos over the course of a season, because an NFL season is very long and there's going to be ups and downs. We started 0-3 and then we end on a 10-game win streak. So you're going to have those ups and downs, and you really have to stay the course and make sure that you stay grounded in everything you put in place, because you put it in place for a reason, and and you were very thoughtful in putting everything into place. So I would say that's the main thing. And in terms of the diverse demands, I think I view it always through it's about their job description. So you take a wide receiver, for example, like you bring a wide receiver in, or you can bring two wide receivers in, and they may play the same position, but have very different expectations around what their actual job is going to be. So I think for us, and for when, I'm looking at an athlete and we're looking at it from a monitoring standpoint, on a risk assessment standpoint, we always think about what is the job description of this athlete, and then shape everything that we do from individual care and management around putting them in the best position possible to stay available and perform well within their respective job descriptions.
Interesting. So I guess on that athlete-centered approach, monitoring is such a topical term with all of our Vault clients. And, there's the best case scenario of monitoring, and you get as many data points as possible, and it's standardized and it's repeatable. What does it actually look like let's just talk about your role in the Texans, but maybe widely across the NFL? Are you actually getting to test these players as often as you would like, or what does the setup look like?
Yeah, I'll speak on behalf of our club and how we do things, and we're very fortunate because we have a a tremendous culture. Our guys, buy into what we do. There's a lot of reasons that they buy in. It's not just because, they think they understand the why behind every test. That's a piece of it, but there's so many reasons why they buy in and why they are so compliant with what we ask them to do. We have probably what I would say is the most comprehensive athlete monitoring program in the NFL in terms of all that we collect on a player over the course of a weekend season. If you take, for an example, a wide receiver, that wide receiver is going to be performing a double leg counter movement jump on game day +1, game day -4, long lever hamstring ISO, game day +1, game day -4, potentially a groin ISO on that same frequency of +1, -4. They're going to be completing a wellness questionnaire -4 in the morning, -2 in the morning. They're going to be, and then all the positional tracking pieces, and then dependent upon certain circumstances, their injury history, things like that, there could be additional testing, monitoring pieces that they're doing that we use to inform decision-making around their care and management throughout the week. And that's just, again, if you look at that, that is a lot of different monitoring pieces that they're doing, both from the objective and subjective side. And so, really for them to do that, and again, we have excellent compliance, there has to be a certain degree of buy-in, trust from the athletes. And I think how we've done that is, one, their information is shared with them in many different ways. Like, I give feedback to them, answer questions, any data point that we're collecting, they have access to, but also like I go out of my way to share them, give them feedback. And they also know, and this is a really important one that I think sometimes is missed in these team sport settings, they know that every data point that we're collecting is anchored in some type of intervention. We're using this information in some form or fashion. And we communicate it from an educational standpoint, but also just in terms of a lot of the interventions that we do and the decisions that we use with this information. If something's changed, they're told about it and they're told why and what information led to that change. If they're asked to do something, if they're asked to complete, like see our performance therapist to complete a standardized screen, they know that's because there was an acute limb change. If they're asked, if contact was made by someone from our wellness staff, due to their reporting lethargy before practice along with reduced sleep quality, like they know that those data points are being looked at and immediately communicated to folks around how we can intervene to potentially help them, put them in the best position possible to mitigate risk of injury and stay available. And so, really, I think that's a piece that is really important because, guys want to see their data. They want to know why they're doing things, but they want to know that the information is being used. Ideally, and how we do it is to put them in the best position possible to stay available and perform as well as they can. And if they know that information is getting used in their best interest to put them in those positions, then I think that creates, like, even on days where they're tired, we're coming off of a loss, we just got back from a road trip. Let's say we lost and they're coming in on a +1 and they've got multiple tests they're doing. It's just, they still do it. They complete it and they complete it with a high degree of effort. And that only happens when they know that, hey, like, all of this information is getting looked at and it's getting utilized. Even if nothing comes from it, it's getting looked at to make sure I'm being put in the best position possible to mitigate risk of injury and perform as well as I can. And so I think that is a piece, again, that's really sometimes missing in the team sport setting around the intervention pieces. Sure.
It develops trust. And I think there still is some people will have the opinion that data may be used against you as well in a professional sport when there's money on the line and all this stuff. Completely get that. I'm gonna step it back because I don't want to forget this. There's two things that you mentioned there: a long lever ISO on hamstring and the double leg counter movement jump. And I just know that people watching this or listening to this are going to have the question: number one, what test do you actually do to test long lever hamstring strength? Is it a ISO 30 or
isoprone?
Isoprone.
Yes.
Okay, and that's bilateral.
Bilateral, yes. And now, if in certain situations, there's acute changes versus chronic interlimb differences. In chronic interlimb differences, we'll do a single leg version along with other single leg tests incorporating dynamometry and the force frame around understanding whether it's a strategy linked to more upstream issues or whether it's a more localized tissue capacity situation. And then we'll also use other information that looks at the muscle morphology and kinematic movement with that individual athlete when we do those deep dives. But that's when we're establishing like there's chronicity with this versus in-season monitoring where we might just see a limb change around it. So our base team level monitoring would be the bilateral isoprone for the long lever hamstring iso.
Okay. And then as far as metrics you look at, is it peak force or are you looking at impulse or anything?
It's force and look at always compare left to left, right to right, and then statistically understanding they're within individual standard deviation of that metric on that limb, and then comparing change time point A to time point B divided by that within individual standard deviation, and then any of the percent asymmetry or percent change relative to their coefficient of variation.
Yeah. So before I move on to the
Sorry, that
CMJ,
was a lot there.
That's good. That's good. Before I move on to the CMJ, one standard deviation for every athlete, or do you have any like bandwidths that you've identified?
Sure. So in that calculation, I was describing essentially, we're looking at effect size. Mm-hmm. So it'd be effect size, that value, and then that value is communicated in terms of a categorical descriptor of magnitude. And so it would be large effect size or more. The effect size, the magnitude of the effect size is determined largely based on how much variability that athlete is going to have. So athletes that see a lot of variability within like their left limb producing force, their right limb producing force, obviously it's going to be a higher effect size to actually constitute a large change, so a large negative change if we're looking at reduction, mm-hmm. right? And so with on the flip side, athletes that generally test very consistently with low variability, the actual effect size value would be much lower to fall into categorically that large effect size. And so that's kind of how we're looking at it. When we get into, because I will do also, again, when you still look at the inner limb difference, the difference between both limbs, but I contextualize that to the coefficient of variation of the left limb and the coefficient of variation of the right limb. Mm-hmm. And obviously understanding that, the percent difference between the limb has to be greater than that of the left and of the right. So again, a lot of great work here from Chris Bishop, Matt Jordan, that's informed a lot of all the statistical methods in terms of how we understand limb change, limb function, and then also, Hopkins' work around effect sizes. Mm-hmm. So it's, just trying to understand and make sure that we're factoring in. The biggest thing we're factoring in is we're factoring in the variability within an individual and how they, in whatever metric we're looking at. And it's the same deal with the force plate data. It's making sure we're factoring that in when we're calculating change from time point A to time point B. And as I described kind of our layout monitoring wise, we're always comparing the same time point. So their +1 time point A is compared to their +1 time point B, mm-hmm. When we're looking at change. Yeah,
I like that. I was going to get on a bit of a rant there about asymmetry and just the context that's associated with asymmetry, because a lot of people will just take that percentage value when the absolutes may have completely changed and there's a small change in asymmetry. But I think Matt Jordan's stuff around that is very beneficial as well to read. Mm-hmm. So transition to the ForceDex data. When you're doing your CMJ, what are the metrics you look at without, giving away maybe your secret sauce? But if we're looking from a monitoring point of view to identify meaningful change, or if you're going to have an intervention around, the training load mm-hmm. in the upcoming session or the upcoming week, what are some of the key metrics you're looking at?
Sure. And I'll say, again, this is in reference to team monitoring. We keep it very simple. I kind of bucket it in terms of output and strategy, look at jump height, look at overall contraction time, look at eccentric duration, and then look at eccentric decel impulse and concentric impulse. Okay. Those are all the metrics in totality. And look at, from a fatigue monitoring, i.e. neuromuscular status kind of standpoint, look at contraction time, jump height, and eccentric duration. And then from a limb function standpoint, look at eccentric deceleration impulse and concentric impulse. and look, essentially, again, comparing left to left, right to right, is something changing? The idea being that, it's not about establishing whether there's some type of limb capacity issue, but in our sport, especially being a collision-based sport, many times it's allowing us to get a jump on potentially something that happened in a game that's now causing that athlete to move differently, change strategy around how they're expressing force. So that's really helpful for us. And in those cases, again, we have intervention where it's we're seeing what I call a meaningful acute change in limb function, that there's a screen that's done by our performance therapists that are going to take the athlete through a screen to see, and also just obviously conversation to see whether something was experienced, took a hit on the knee, actually my hip was tight in this one play, and things like that. But it could also be, if there's from the assessment standpoint, it could be things that the athlete's unaware of around range of motion change of a joint around somewhere along the chain. But it's like, that's why we do that assessment, is to see. And sometimes it's nothing at all, which is fine. It's about being proactive with the information and saying, okay, something's changing. It may not be bad, but we want to make sure that we're being proactive and using it to inform, what we're doing. And so that's how we kind of look at it from acute change. So metrics that I would say we look at from like a neuromuscular status standpoint versus metrics we look at more from like an inner limb function standpoint.
I got you. And then the final piece before I move on to, I guess, my next line of questioning is reactive strength. Does that factor into your readiness protocols at all? Or reactive strength, you could argue, is the CMJ as well with the slower stuff, but drop, jump, hop test, any of those types of things? Yeah,
we absolutely use those. But we use those more for off season, looking at the, adaptations with training, the efficacy of the training program. But absolutely, we look at reactive strength. We do drop jump. We do rebound jump. We have multiple variations. Yeah. We have variations from different heights. We have variations involving single versus double limbs. And then obviously within our jump progression of all of the rehab processes, right? Those are layered in to align with where they are in terms of their training program of reconditioning. And so we absolutely look at those from a monitoring, like in-season standpoint of neuromuscular status. We do not do the drop jump or any of those tests. Now, with the metrics that I mentioned, obviously, the RSI modified is picked apart within the contraction time and the jump height. Those are looked at individually around a change. And so that's factored in from that direction. But reactive strength in and of itself and ground contact time and some of these other measures looking at or representing qualities that are very important in our sport. We certainly look at those in the off season around training adaptations and the efficacy of our program over time.
Yeah, that was a bit of a curveball because I come from a rugby background, and we had a period, maybe a 5-year period, where drop jumps and hop tests were like the readiness test.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to get into why they are and why they aren't, but it's just interesting to see if that's trickled across to the NFL and to your program as well. But that's awesome.
And absolutely, I think there's a time and place. It's obviously dependent upon your context. Drop landings are very popular right now as well. There's a lot of variations you can look at, and there's certain rationale that support the utilization of those tests, no doubt. For me, I look at it, the double leg CMJ, I believe, gives me the information I need. The metrics are sensitive enough to detect fatigue when it's present, but not too sensitive. I'm able to get all the information I need to inform the decisions that we make. And with a test that I would say is a little less invasive and stressful to these guys in season. And just from a player perspective, I know I'd much rather be doing a double leg CMJ during a game week on week 13 of the season than I would a drop jump, say from an 18-inch box or something.
Yeah.
So I always factor that in as well, because we do ask a lot of our players, but I always try to be very mindful of what the player perspective is. If we're asking them to do something, is there an easier, less invasive way to do this? Is there like what do I need to do to get the information I need to inform the decision I'm trying to make? And if there's a test that's less stressful, less invasive, and again, I'm speaking especially on in season, like I'm always going to go with the option that's going to allow me to get the information that I need in provide the sensitivity and reliability and all those factors that is less invasive to the athlete, and more athlete friendly. And that, I think, kind of feeds into that athlete centered approach. Like everything's always going back to what's best for the athlete. What is, how can we make decisions that really are focused on everything, availability, performance, the athlete preference, the athlete ideal, I guess you would say. And so that's what I always try to anchor that in.
Yeah. Awesome. So we spoke about force decks, force frame, Nord board there. And obviously this is VALDCAST. We're talking about Vald technology. That's fine. But very aware that that's such a small cog in a much larger machine. So is there any other technology or methodologies that you're using for your monitoring as well? I know you mentioned some of your questionnaires and stuff, but maybe just specific technology that's separate to the Vald ecosystem.
Yeah. So we do use a lot of Vald products, the force frame, dynamometry. Okay. We have a lot of Vald products, but so I would say probably the tool that we use, outside of all the different Vald products, probably the tool that we use the most would be 1080s. We utilize those in a lot of different ways. We utilize those more so from looking at training adaptations, from looking at output, finding value in like force expression in the first 3 steps, power expression in the first 3 steps. And then obviously like all the basic stuff you would look at, like split times and things like that. And then you can, we utilize that in conjunction with kinematic data. So kind of thinking about 1080 being more of the what, and then the kinematic piece being more of the how. And so layering those two together. And then I think from an in-season monitoring perspective, really trying to keep it simple around, again, I covered all the isometric pieces and the jump task, but we do rely heavily on the subjective data. So again, not sexy in terms of it's not a high tech or anything like that, but a lot of belief in that from our coaching staff as well. They understand the value in that, capturing the player report. And then again, like you're capturing information and data that can gain insight into maybe things that are happening outside of the building, things that the player might be experiencing that's stressful, that's impacting their recovery, their response to stress, the physical stress piece. And so I think like it's very valuable from a monitoring perspective. And then we have a lot of other technologies we incorporate in different ways. We use TMG, as part of our flow as well. But really, I think the 1080 would be the biggest piece next to all the Vald products that we utilize.
100%. That's awesome. I think having that systemized approach just allows you to adapt, as you mentioned at the start, just depending on the demands, depending on the week of the season that you're in, and you can get good data regardless. So that's great. You're talking here today. You're going to be down there in an hour or so. Talk to me. Give me a quick rundown of what the presentation is diving into, because I think maybe a snippet of that would help some of the people listening as well.
Sure. Yeah. So really going to touch on how to put a system together. In particular, going to kind of focus on an athlete monitoring system. So a lot of times we'll run into, I'll get asked 2 questions most frequently. One, how do I decide which tools and tech to utilize? What metrics am I looking at? Those kind of questions. And then 2, essentially how to go about building something out, like building an athlete monitoring system out, building a system out to look at the effectiveness of training, whatever that system is, right? And so what I found very valuable is, I'll give you the what and things like that, but those are the methods really. And it's about the principles you're applying, not the methods. The methods are like, there's so many ways to do that, but you got to have some guiding framework to allow you to make these decisions. So today I'm going to talk about how to build a system. And then I'm going to share kind of my athlete monitoring framework, which is 4 constructs: training stress, objective response indicators, subjective response indicators, and intrinsic athlete factors. So those 4 constructs, and they're all interrelated, but they provide distinct insight into athlete performance status. And so basically the way I describe it is, you take that framework into any sporting environment, any sport, any level, the most resourced or the least resourced, and you would just select, it's like a menu. You select something to capture training stress. You select something to capture objective response, something to capture subjective response, and then something to kind of capture the intrinsic or non-modifiable factors of the athlete. And then if you have something represented out of each construct, you've got a complete athlete monitoring system. And get into some of the nuance around why that's so important to have each construct represented, because you have to build in flexibility in a system. You're not going to capture all tools all the time. You're not going to, that's why it's important that each construct provides some, are interrelated, but they're also provide some distinct insight, because you're building a system. You want to build a system around something that's going to be sustainable, repeatable, and is flexible within the chaotic team sport environment, which we know things are always going to be coming at you. So your system has to withstand that. And so really today, that's what I'm going to get into, is how to build a system. What that framework looks like, options out of that framework, and then share a little bit about obviously how I do that. But I always tell people, like, yeah, that's how I do it. But you take this framework into your own environment, because your environment is going to be really specific, and you need to build it based on your needs, your personnel, what you're coaching, all of those factors that are organizational specific.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like a mature approach to, maybe at VALD, we have this thing, we call it democratizing technology, where we offer it to the masses. So it's no longer your elite research lab, or it's your Houston Texans. It's the physio clinic down the road, and we've got options for everyone. So I think it's a similar concept with the frameworks, and it's great to see that as well, that you're not almost exclusive. It's not exclusive to high performance or whatever. So that's great. And I guess, like, to wrap it up, I always ask a bit of a curveball question to people, but I'll keep it pretty simple. And maybe let's try and not use the word or the letters AI for the answer. But what do you think upcoming practitioners coming into this space need to be, aware of and prepared for? Because the space is changing at a rapid rate. But from what you've seen, where are we going next as an SSC in sports science industry?
Well, yeah. Well, I taken AI off the top, because I was going to say the application of AI in sport is definitely kind of the next thing in terms of, figuring out how to incorporate that within your organization. But setting that aside, I would say that, as sports science grows, and I'm going to speak specifically here, in the United States too, it's like a lot of these, the performance unit is changing. High performance models are getting implemented within all the professional sports. Now college environments are changing. Sports science, when I was coming up, that was, I was strength coach, I was sports scientist, I was doing about 7 different jobs. Now you're seeing the field shape where you're getting very specialized roles and responsibilities around sports science. And so I would say now, as people are coming up, they're getting, they're kind of jumping onto something very specific and learning a lot about it, which I think is great. I think moving forward, as practitioners come up through university, and then they go into, their practice, wherever that is, I think one thing that's going to be, really important for them to do is have a better understanding around holistic performance and how high performance operates. And I know this isn't like an innovative question or anything like that, but I think where we're going, you're going to end up getting more and more specialized people within sport performance that do certain things really well. I code Python. I can operate Python. I can operate SQL. I can operate R very well. I understand, or I'm software engineer, and I have this really good skill set around building data infrastructures. Like, no problem. That's great. But if being part of a performance unit, as we get these very specialized roles, there's already a loss of understanding performance from the larger picture of like what a high performance oriented organization looks like, what that truly means in terms of how that impacts your behaviors, your responsibilities, the flow and interaction of personnel. And so I think really being able to have that ability and learn and step out, zoom out, learn these other areas at least a little bit, and be able to have that better, wider understanding of high performance is going to be very valuable, and I think going to be somewhat of a separator moving forward of people as they move up in their careers and things like that. Because again, it's something that we all kind of had coming up, so to speak, because we had to do so many different things, but now it's just something I'm noticing a lot. And I think moving forward, that's just going to be something that becomes more and more important. and really becomes a differentiator in a lot of ways where people, whether you get a job or not, or whether you're promoted or not, or what your advancements look like in your career. So that's what I would say. Again, a little different direction with that. But it's just honestly just something that's kind of, I'm noticing right now, and it's kind of on my mind. So
yeah. I like that. It's a new frontier. It's a new challenge compared to what maybe the last decade has shown. That and AI. I think we'll take AI off the.
Yeah, I was going to say that's everything right now in terms of the application of AI in team sport. Everyone's trying to figure that out. I will say this as well. I'll throw this in there. The level of individualization of like combining a variety of information streams. So even take something example of like, we kind of touched on it briefly, but you're taking, these performance tasks, you're taking different types, because there's so many tools now where you're getting, insight into muscle morphology. You're getting insight into how they're moving. You're getting all these different information streams that provide a lot of different data points. And you're going to have the ability to combine a lot of really complex data points and distinct information streams into one convergent type of model to help better understand how to individualize player care and management. I think that is the next step in terms of this idea around individualized training for athletes. And there's a lot of technology out there right now. I think that leveraging these different data streams to get really individualized with approach, almost similar to what we would say with AI, because one of the advantages of AI is hyper individualization, right? Mm-hmm. Around learning, around really everything. So I think again, in that same similar vein, I think now with a lot of these new technologies, the improvement within technologies that already existed, you're going to have the ability to get a lot of really good information to really look at different things around athlete care and management and really individualize it to the athlete at a level that we just really haven't been able to do before, because you're going to get so much insight into all different areas of athlete movement, athlete muscle morphology, mm-hmm. athlete performance, and you're going to be able to connect all of those.
For sure. And then I guess the tricky task for people in leadership roles like yourself is figuring out how to do that, and maybe which of those insights to pull. You've got access to everything, but you're never going to look at everything. So figuring out what's the most important or the biggest bang for your buck.
Absolutely. And I also think this also feeds into the application of AI.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're also going to see a lot of clubs build their own AI ecosystems.
For sure.
So that they can get to the point where they're utilizing it in their data management, analysis, and interpretation.
Yeah. And so, if they're not doing that already, they're probably behind. I would assume that most clubs are at least laying the foundations and putting some infrastructure in place.
The biggest piece is the infrastructure, because obviously, like all the data security, data governance, I'll just, to use a broader term, that mm-hmm. you have to be concerned with to make sure that you're being protective. Because really the level you'd have to go to and what you would have to share and put out there, you got to create your own ecosystem. There's a lot of people involved in that. And so to do it right, like you said, you're laying the groundwork now, you're building it. And that's where I think most clubs, at least I'm speaking of clubs more here in the United States, is I'm less familiar with what some of the clubs in, the Australia or UK are doing. However, I know from even those snapshots, most of them are putting that ecosystem in place. I don't think anyone's got to the point now where the ecosystem's in place and they're operationalizing it to a great degree. So I think right now, like the clubs that are kind of those early adopters are building that ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And then those are going to be the early adopters that are actually applying and utilizing these tools for hyper individualization and extreme efficiency around data collection, management, analysis, mm-hmm. and interpretation.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 5 to 10 years, I think, for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. Right. Well, Marc, if anyone wants to reach out to you and connect off the back of this, where's the best spot to do that?
Probably social media, Instagram or X, at Marc T. Lewis. My website, drmarclewis.com. And then Adam and I, our business, the Sports Science Network, we also wrote a book, the Sports Science Handbook. There's a lot of different avenues. I try to check everything. I'm more than happy to respond to messages, connect with people. I'm always up for connecting with really interesting people, having conversations about really anything. So if you're curious about something or you just want to connect and chop it up a little bit, then feel free to reach out to me and we'll set something up.
Amazing. Well, I'm really looking forward to your presentation in less than an hour. And yeah, thanks for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll connect soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ryan.